So today's presentation is Leading the Innovative Organization, Unleash and Sustain Creativity. Its focus is not just on understanding creativity and how it leads to innovation, but actually a little bit on organizational design, how you can create an organization that allows you to accomplish it. I want to start off with kind of a quiz to help get our brains thinking. It fits, right? Creativity. So I want you to look at the equation on the bottom of your screen and imagine that this equation is made of sticks that can be moved. And what's the least effort you need to turn this incorrect equation into one which is correct? Okay, if you've got that, you've thought it out. A lot of people are going to get rid of one of those lines where you have a plus, turn it into a minus, and therefore it's a 1. 11 minus 1 equals 10. Some of you might have moved this to the other side, put the plus and the 1 on the other side. That's a 3. But the absolute real answer is none of the above. Is all you needed to do is turn your head upside down, or essentially look at it backwards, and that means 10 equals 1 plus 9. And that's the point. We need different perspectives to see what we're looking for if we're going to accomplish the goals we want, which is why I share this with you. Let's take another one of these kind of examples to give you an idea of how to use your head for creativity. So in this case, let's just connect these 9 dots with a set of 4 lines without ever lifting your pencil from the paper. So if you have it, you can quickly take on a sheet of paper in front of you, make 9 dots, and just try to connect it. I'll give you about 30 seconds to try it, see if you can do it. And if you're like most people, it's difficult. You cannot do it unless you do something we today call thinking out of the box. And that's exactly the point. You have to go outside of the box by expanding the box, expanding it, so that you can go above, to the sides, and below. That's the only way to do it. And I'll give you one more example to kind of stimulate your creativity. On this one is, I want you to picture a black cat with a big stick. When I do this in workshops, and obviously we teach creativity in workshops, we have a program on innovation, we have a program on creativity, we have a new program on exponential organizations, all designed to do slightly different things to help people out. We get all kinds of things like a cat in your living room with a sewing needle. Okay, or a knitting needle, I should say. Or we get a larger cat in the backyard playing with a branch or a stick or something like that. But when this one was first presented to me, I was with a group of people who loved jazz. And so they thought of Louis Armstrong, whose trumpet was nicknamed the Stick. So hence it was a black cat, okay, cat being a euphemism for someone in jazz, and a big stick. So again, words, images, concepts are all about creativity. So our agenda today is to focus on those 3 issues: how you get more creativity from your people, how you channel it into innovation, and how you lead that. So we're going to start off by focusing on stimulating creativity. What are some of the things you can do? And then we're going to end with building the organization. So let's first go back and put it all together. What is creativity? Our definition that gives you a way of looking at it is to say it's breaking down prior assumptions, as you did in the first 3 exercises we did, and make new connections for new ideas. So this is a part that can be done in anyone's head. It's generally done by one person, though a team can work together at it as they take different assumptions and force you to think about it. And here's the key point: anybody can do it. Innovation, on the other hand, is what comes from that creativity. Now that you've taken those assumptions apart, made new connections, you can then take them and create new ideas and turn them into corporate marketplace reality. Okay, so innovation is taking creativity and producing bottom line results. And the invention, by the way, is a form of innovation, but it's not exactly the same thing, because a invention is a commercial product that takes advantage of the innovation. And innovation might not be a new product. It might be a new process, a new way of doing things that we currently do. So it's a different kind of approach. Having defined our terms, we can move on now to the next stage and say, well, how important is this topic? Most of you are here because you understand it's important. But just to give you some numbers behind it, Frito-Lay, which is a giant snack food company, as you know, it's one half basically of PepsiCo, attributes more than $100 million in cost reductions to employee creativity sessions. Tufts used it as the second largest HMO to reach its goal of reaching 1 million members a year, and it was able to do this ahead of time, a year ahead of time. And it used a lot of innovation, winning 4 awards and launching 11 new products. 3M makes its reputation, as we all know. We're all familiar with Post-it notes, by encouraging the creation of new innovative products and services. And approximately every year, 30% of all sales come from those new products. And finally, Cisco, spelled with an S, which is a food distributor, as opposed to CISCO, which is a computer hardware company, essentially producing networking devices on the internet, reports that its creativity training increases their productivity of employees by about 25 to 30%. So as you can see, there's tremendous capability of growing your company faster by encouraging people to be creative and innovative. What's important to understand is that creativity is not the province of an R&D department exclusively. It's something everybody can do. Why? Because everyone has those creative capabilities, and second, it's everywhere that you're looking. So it might be a product like Post-it notes, it might be a process. Try to think about Henry Ford creating the assembly line. Okay, it's a process for how to produce a car cheaper and faster than ever before. E-commerce is a whole new way when it was first built in the 1990s for doing transactions on the internet as opposed to in retail stores. You can have different functions. Today we do when we talk about sales and marketing. Most of us were talking about social media and how radically it's changing everything. In fact, yesterday I was privileged to be at a Vistage meeting. I'm the Vistage chair, as some of you may know, and I was in a meeting with Gary Vaynerchuk, who's the person who kind of really launched Wine Library and now runs a giant media company focusing on use of social media. And he made the observation, which we all know, but we kind of don't pay attention to, is that if you think about the single most important product that every one of us holds on to every single day, it's not even your wallet anymore. It's your iPhone or your cell phone or your smartphone, whatever you want to call it. 100% of all the hands go up. We all have it. And more important, we all have it around us almost 24 hours a day. Even at night, we keep it nearby in case we can use it. Financial tools, think of spreadsheets having morphed into now an entire way of doing it. And management is also changing. It's now virtual. It's global, and we'll talk about that much more in other programs. So it occurs everywhere, but generally there are 3 goals in everything that's being done. The first is to increase efficiency. So think of how an ATM changed banking because you didn't need to have a person stand there and change your money, take the deposit, or give you cash. Second, it's a superior system for doing what you're doing. So, for example, a hybrid car is a step forward going away from the traditional gas engine. Electric may be the future of doing the same thing. Over the next 5, 10 years, we'll see lots more of both of them. Again, it's a superior method of providing vehicular transportation and saving the environment. But some of it goes even beyond that, and it's disruptive. It's just changing the game. Think about it. The single largest provider of rooms for people who are traveling and they want to stay in some kind of room is not a traditional hotel chain like Starwoods or Hilton or Sheraton, but it is, you're right, Airbnb. And you know how many rooms they have? I think they have one for their main headquarters. That's about it. So it changes it, yet its market cap is larger. With a $51 billion right now, which is the value that's been put on Uber, and again, all of these other companies around the world that are doing it, Lyft, BlaBlaCar, etc., that are transforming the way in which people do transportation. Collaborative economy has totally radically disrupting many, many parts of the existing economy. All of that coming out of people who are being creative and looking for innovations. The key, though, from an organizational point of view, which is why this is what we bring it to, because most of us work in companies and want our companies to be more innovative, is to understand that it needs a leader. And that leader has to champion it. And it has to champion it at a stage very often where it's not being perceived as anything other than an expense. Because creativity takes time to produce, and the creativity chain to innovation and eventually maybe an invention or commercialization of it is going to take even more time. As you can see, it's a long-term source of profit, and it's a reason to invest, but you need to be confident of it. Now, what's important to understand is when you're behind an innovation, you want to really try to understand what it's going to do. So if you think about iPhone, it creates new standards, it creates new customer experiences, it transforms industries. Okay, those are three different goals that innovations can accomplish, and that's what you want to do. You want to promote them where you can have the maximum impact. There's different roles we play in our different functions of what we do every day, and in innovation, it's no different. In creativity and innovation, there are generally four roles, according to Sheila Murray Bethel, and I think she's got it. One is to enlighten people, it's that awareness factor, okay? So you get people committing to a cause, and that's their role to be able to have people do it. There are other people who are the inspired geniuses, they're actually doing the creating itself. But again, all four are critical to the enterprise of innovation. There are builders. So if you think about it that way, Jack Welch was a builder. He comes into in the 1980s. General Electric. General Electric is a big, large company, but it's bumbling in terms of where it's going. It's not making profit. He then decides to get out of any industry where he's not either number one or number two, and using that approach, he's able to turn it in the year 2000 to the company with the single largest market cap, and that's why he was actually named the CEO of the century, the 20th century. Andy Grove did similar kind of work at Intel when he changed that company from a memory company to a microchip microprocessor company. And the final role is sustainers, people who once that creativity has been infused into an innovation, gets the innovation incorporated in the company. Most of the time, corporations have to take, they create something called skunk works. They actually take the innovative team and take them outside of the company because the company, by definition, has to do what it's doing today every single day and make it more efficient and effective. And it can't, therefore, risk making changes that would slow it down. Therefore, the innovative group, the creative group, goes off campus and works out of some other plant so that they're not being interfered with or interfering with the main enterprise. So, for example, when IBM launched its version of the first basic computer, the PC that was around, IBM, which is based up here in the Northeast, in New York and New Jersey, had a skunkworks group down in Florida. They created the first PC, which, by the way, was actually copyrighted, trademarked rather, as a name, which makes it really incredible. So in GE's case, Jeff Immelt gets promoted, and we'll talk about that in leadership later on at the end of this set of presentations, about how General Electric had 5 different people, all highly qualified, ready to go ahead and take the company to the next level. And Jeff Immelt was brought in, and his job has been to sustain the energy that Jack Welch did. Whether he succeeded or not, we need to take a second look at. The stock of General Electric has not been going up for the last 15 years. Only now, with some more changes, is things really beginning to shake. Okay, the problem with companies is companies are risk adverse. And you're probably very aware of that because that's generally what holds companies back. So what we're finding is, and this is an interesting study that Accenture put together, 52% of the people in the company said, I wanted to pursue an entrepreneurial idea, but only 20% said they actually got any support. 77% of the people are reporting that ideas can be rewarded, but only 20%, 23% say they actually get the reward because it's proven. In other words, instead of focusing on knowing that you have to sometimes not succeed, as we now call it fail fast, they're not getting rewarded. And again, keeping in mind that in a company, the company's job is to maintain the system and the process it's currently using. So having innovative people within the company who might disrupt it as it's being produced could be counterproductive. And that's why they're risk adverse, to make sure that doesn't happen, which is why, again, moving them off campus may make a lot of sense. Okay, having that kind of a sense of the landscape, now let's focus on we've got a team. We're trying to make them creative and spur them to be innovative, whether it's in a company or in that Skunkworks team. How do we go forth and do that? And the answer is to recognize how important it is for people to make mistakes. So after Steve Jobs died, people asked who is probably the single most significant representative of innovation in this country. And for many people, that has become Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon. And so it was interesting that Forbes interviewed him and asked the question, how do you get so many people to be innovative? And his answer is, I encourage our employees to go down blind alleys. And again, as I said before, the key to success in a company is to be able to understand you have to try new things out. And once you do, expect that it's not going to always work. In fact, it won't work most of the time, hence the blind alley concept. So the key is a couple of points. One is recognize that creativity and innovation are not the province of a couple of isolated geniuses working alone. So the images we often have of Edison or Ford or Westinghouse or even Einstein are all about people who were creative individually, but if you think about it, they all will tell you they built on the energy of others. Edison had a whole factory in New Jersey, a whole laboratory that he worked with. Ford stole the ideas, as we'll see, from other people, pulled them together in a way that hadn't been formed before, and then had a team of people put it together. So the key here is to recognize, as I said earlier, it's not about a group of very creative people we put in the R&D department. It's recognizing that any place and anywhere in the company we can find creative people. So even the people who are in bean counters and finance can be creative and say there's an alternative way of looking at the information we are, collecting it, processing it, etc. In fact, this morning I was working with the CEO that's working out of Europe, Shanghai. It focuses on Asia actually and the United States, and focusing on collecting what I would call big data. And the focus of the big data is obviously to be able to take a look at how people actually act and get those transactions together, and working with those transactions, be able to make decisions about what people would want, and for marketing companies and for companies trying to sell to use that that set of data to be able to make better decisions on who to focus in on with ad campaigns, marketing programs, etc. Again, everybody can look at this stuff in different ways and see different kinds of creativity that can come out of it. So the key is for us as leaders, and again, that's what produce things that are happening. Okay, I think our mic is back on. We were disconnected for a few minutes, so I'm really sorry about that. But now we're back on again. Um, and with that, I can continue. So again, motivation, curiosity, and fear, breaking and making connections and evaluation is key to what we're doing. So the question becomes, how again do we spur that creativity? And the answer to the question is that creativity favors the prepared mind. In other words, people, anybody who's open to looking at new perspectives is going to get it. So Fulton's steamship basically came from him looking at a steam engine and seeing how it worked and looking at sailing ships and saying, what if I put it on the ship? Well, Ford, what he actually did is he started off by taking a look at the Chicago meat packers and realizing they take a cow and they hang it on a hook, and as it goes through the meat packers, little by little, they're cutting away different parts of the body of the carcass and the meat. And he said, "Wow, this is a very streamlined system." And then he understood something. Second, he saw how Singer was creating sewing machines with interchangeable parts. So instead of having unique tools, these were tools that could be moved back and forth. And said, "Wow, what if you use that also to be able to produce the material you look for, or even the parts that you're doing?" So instead of disassembling, he assembles, he uses interchangeable parts, and that's why we have the automobile assembly line that we have today. Some of these things that happen are accidental. Again, so an example would be it was mold that produced penicillin. It was a failed glue that produced Post-it notes. It was actually a failed clinical trial. It was supposed to be able to help people who were bald. That leads to Viagra. It's not always going to be something that's purposeful, but it can be. An example of a purposeful innovation is the Reebok pump. Here the issue is because somebody had an ankle needing support and they needed to create a different splint to do it. And what they did is they took a look at how athletic shoe heels provide energy and they put it together, and that's how they created the Reebok pump, which was $1 billion product within its first year. So the opportunity to produce new things comes if you come with a problem and a challenge and you work on it. One of the ways to do that for other people is to nurture the creativity. Now, you can do this in a workshop, or you can do it, as we'll talk later, about setting up people's time where they can pursue it in any way they want to, and they can do this on their own. So some of the ways of doing it is just to ask questions. And yesterday I was in a conversation with someone, and he was talking about the 5 whys. For those of you not familiar, when someone gives you an answer, it's usually not a great answer, so you have to pursue it with another why and another why. And usually by the 5th why, you get to the real reason people are doing what they're doing. And that's when asking questions is really very useful. The second is to stop action. Don't just go with the flow. Stop it, take a look at it, stand outside of yourself, kind of go to the balconies, as negotiators call it, and look down and say, why am I doing what I'm doing? And then you realize maybe what you're doing doesn't make any sense. So I mentioned before, vary your routine. I walk down different blocks when I go to work a couple times a week on purpose, just to vary my routine, see different things, stimulate my mind in new different ways. Create creative habits, whether that's reading, practicing, writing, sports, anything that makes you to be creative is something you do and you can do routinely. There's an old saying, if you really love your work, you never work a day in your life because it's something you're passionate about. Well, find your passion. That'll help unleash your creativity because the two go hand in hand. You'll be focusing on doing it. A sense of humor very often helps. And so reawakening it, if you've lost it, might help. But if you have one already, just keep using it because as you laugh at yourself, you see things that are different that you hadn't seen before. During that period of time that we mentioned before, where people say, I'm going to use this for creative time, one of the ways of doing that effectively is to be able to read or listen to a variety of material. And if you ever need a list of books and articles on innovation, send me an email and I'll share it with you, because every time we do a workshop, we're adding new books and magazines to it so that people can follow up on much of this on their own. And the final part is to find a space that encourages it. It's not just time, but it's a place. Again, you need to change your routine, change your environment. So a perfect example is when I was in school, in elementary school, I had a friend who was an artist and a budding artist, and he needed to stimulate it. And he literally took a very big closet and he turned it into a black room with scents and colored lights and everything to stimulate his mind to be able to produce his painting. And I never forgot, he found the real space. Again, as I said, you can ask questions. The 5 whys is one, but another way of looking at it is the fundamental questions of why, what, when, where, how, etc. If you look at those questions, they make you ask about what you're doing and giving you perspective. Another way to do it is called the 7 R's, to rethink what you're doing, reconfigure, resequence, relocate, reduce, reassign, retool, different ways of doing it. Just change what you're doing. I just finished reading for the second time a book by Daniel Buras called Flash Foresight. And one of his things is go to the opposite again, resequencing it, dropping something out. So he drops out what he thinks is necessary and skips over it, and the net result is he gets to a brainstorm that he wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. One of the ways to do all of this is to use metaphors. Metaphors are very useful because they give us images to work on. So again, the big bad wolf can huff and puff and blow it down. Can also be stopped if you build a solid house. And in this case, it's a software company that tried to make a point you can't hack into us. And that became its symbol for an ad campaign that took it from zero, meaning startup, to finish in no time, in 1 year. Another one is to just take concepts and play with it. I take interns. I do a lot of work with interns. If you don't know, go to mentorourkids.org or mentoringinternships.com because in fact, we just added finally an extra 100 that I probably added. I have 4 right now working with me. So we've had over 600 interns. So again, you can change your equation if you have people who are creative and young and thinking. So anyway, I bring them to software companies and we ask people what do they do, and they all talk about system integration as if it's everything. And then we thought about Shelley's concept of Frankenstein monster. Frankenstein essentially, by which was an integrated being created by Dr. Frankenstein, and it might look like the character on the left. And I do a lot of work, obviously, through presentation excellence, and very often that's what it feels like. People are taking all the different pieces and putting it together, and they don't fit well. Or you can do it as a unified system where the way it's supposed to all go together, everything goes together and fits together. So there are many different tools that you can use to be able to do it. Some of them, and these are master tools that are out there. Brainstorming, you've probably all heard of. Alone, it doesn't work. It has to be facilitated. It has to be working correctly. It can also be done in writing, called brain writing, mind mapping, laying out different possibilities, storyboarding, visualizing it, imagination engineering, trying to force yourself to think about different futures, different scenarios. Where does it go? Forced associations is just taking words and associating them until you find a connection you hadn't even thought about, which is kind of like wouldn't it be nice if something happened? What's the future like in 2020? Wouldn't it be nice if we had leaders in this country who really acted like leaders? Visualization, to picture something that you've got, and Scamper. Scamper is actually a word, it's an acronym that was developed by Alex Osborne, who is the founder of BBD&O, an advertising agency. And what he basically said is, how do I find something new for my product and service? And he says, I do it by changing something. And he came up with the word scamper: substitute, combine, adapt, magnify, put to other uses, eliminate, and rearrange or reverse. And if you go through whatever you're looking at and ask how you can change things and do it that way, that's fine. For those of you who want a simple example, think of your ketchup bottle. Years ago, it was always built one way, cap on top, the base on the bottom. Then Heinz tried to see what would happen if you reversed it. Again, rearrange it, put it so that the base is the cap, so it's always down there and it doesn't get stuck at the other end. It's a perfect example of an application of an innovation that comes from rearranging, reversing a basic premise. In sum, there's a lot you can do. And for that, one of the best ways to get people to start thinking that way and incorporating it into your company is beginning to do some training. We have a program called Let's Get Creative, where we sit down with key problems and kind of really focus on people doing it. And here's an interesting point that Roger Firestein made it. When you analyze people who are communicating, in small groups, and you take a look at it, what you find is people who have been trained to be more creative consistently speak more often, give more of the support, have a better time at it, enjoy it, create an atmosphere that's more conducive to the point of generating twice as many ideas. So training people to be more creative is a really great way to get it, not just passing a magic wand and saying, "Ta-da, you're going to be creative," because it doesn't work that way. In sum, if your commitment here, which is why I hope you've come today, is to be able to encourage people to be creative and then turn that into innovation, what you need to do is really help people do the following. One, immerse yourself in the challenge. This is not a part-time effort, at least not in terms of the amount of time it's going to be. Blocks of time have to be set away where you really immerse yourself to understand the challenge. I've always had a philosophy that there's only two people who can really understand how to be creative in idea, or people who know nothing about it whatsoever and therefore coming at it totally new, or people who've immersed themselves and get a different perspective on how to do it. The second thing is once you've made this challenge and you say, I want to try to solve it differently, you have to explore the issue creatively. How do we look at this thing different? So think about how Uber looked at transportation. It didn't. What it did is it looked at technology and said, you know what's really great? We got all these people who want to drive, and we got all these people who are looking for a way to get driving that's much more responsive and much nicer. Is there a way to put it together and build a business model around that concept? So you set an approach, you start asking, how do we do it? How can we do it? And you select that approach, whether it's in a company or in this case, a new company. You articulate a solution. So imagine everyone's with a mobile phone, smartphone, and able to say to people, I'm just going to literally ask for someone with a car to show up, and they're going to show up, okay, within minutes. And so you can change the whole thing. You then have to develop it and transform it. Now, the reason Uber's valued so much is because it took a lot to build that software. It needs to work through lots of companies and regulation. It's obviously bucking a trend of taxi cabs, for example, that's exactly established and already has the lobbying capabilities. So it's an expensive effort to do, and they have to transform the idea to one of, is this about an industry protection or is it about the customer? That's really what the issue is about. And then you have to champion it. And Travis, who is the head of Uber, is a phenomenal champion. He's constantly promoting it in terms of where it can go. So if you've done that and you've come up with this is the innovation we want, now comes the final leadership job, and that is you have to lead the organization. That's a role, believe it or not, that most people never get raised to do. In other words, we send people to schools, MBAs. They graduate with an MBA from top schools, but how to manage innovation is not part of it, which is why we're spending a little bit of time with you to do that so you can think about it. So the first thing you're going to need to do is create a business case for the innovation. Okay? Why? Because you do want organizational support. And so it's not just a gut instinct. You need to be able to show the organization why it's in their best interest, excuse me, to produce the results that you're looking for. So one is you assess the needs. Who are the ones? Where's the demand? Why will this make a difference? How will this help people? Let's take an example of the 3M Post-it notes. Fry built these notes, and he did this for his own purpose. He was looking. Well, first of all, it was failed glue, and nobody did anything with it, so it just sat there. And then one day, he's in a church choir, and he wants to mark the pages of the music in front of him, and he's trying to find something to do it. So he wants to put something on there, but obviously glue would stick, and he didn't want it. And he realized this failed glue would be perfect because he could write a note on it, put it on there, and then take it off without damaging the point. He does that for himself and he gets it. He then passes this information on to another person. This other person says, there's a commercial application possibly for it. He says, what is it? He says, I'm not sure, but let's find out in an unusual way. What? He creates a whole lot of Post-it notepads and he gives them out to a bunch of his secretaries. In those days, we all had secretaries. Today, we call them executive assistants. The point was they had them and then they said, if you can find a way to use it, it's yours. If not, it doesn't matter. And the next thing is they found many applications. So again, that was neither a need. Nobody needed it before they knew about it. Like Henry Ford makes a comment all the time. If people would have asked, how do you get the horses and carriages faster? People would have said how to raise different horses, how to restructure the carriage. No one would have immediately said, well, what if we had a horseless carriage, which is what a car is. Second is analyze the competition. If you start off, you're going to have to do it a little differently. So if you're Uber, you're competing in China with Didi, which is a major car service offering the same services. You've got Lyft here in America. New York City's got Get, which is both here and in other countries. Analyze the competition. And the key competition for them, obviously, is the incumbent, taxi cabs, but needs to look at the new ones because the answer is it fights the battles because it's marked with that. It needs to deal with everybody else. It needs to assess the market. Do people want to have more convenient, faster services, especially in bad weather? Today is a rainy day in New York. Perfect day probably for Uber, Lyft, and Get and any of these other companies. Assesses the market, it masters the technology. Again, it has to be a really good system. Somebody just recently but it's clearly sorry again for that interference. For some reason, our internet keeps going up and down. We're going to have a more innovative way to do this. It's the second interruption, so I apologize. You want to plan the product launch. Again, part of it's planning it, getting more user experience, etc. Make sure there's enough support on it to be able to figure out what's working and what's not working, and evaluating and using the feedback to make it better. It's that whole loop, and if you don't do it all, it's going to fail. Then what you need to do is create a culture. Now remember, in organizations we now know, and we're going to be talking about this later, that it's not about the individuals, but it's about the culture that supports the capability of producing what we're doing. So what's important is to understand what are the qualities of the culture. And if you take a look here at these 10 characteristics that I brought together from 50 items that are important, what do these 10 really show us? They show us that all 9 of the first 10 are all positive things. You want to create a challenge, freedom. You want to support people's ideas. You want to encourage people to be able to play with time and have fun doing it and get involved with debates. Absolutely critical to a culture for innovation is trust and openness, that people feel they're getting a lot out of it. And the final part is actually the reduction of a negative. It's minimal conflicts, keeping the conflicts to an absolute minimum. And that's the whole point. That's why culture is such an important part, because the isolated individual is going to need this kind of support, and as a group, going to need it even more. That's why when many of us listen and hear about the stories of these startup companies that are developing new products and services, and we see they have, billiard tables and ping pong tables and food all over the place and stuff like that. Very different than established IBM type companies that have been around and have a routine for what it's doing. It's because they're trying to create a culture that constantly is playful, full of humor, dynamic, and developing new kinds of relationships so that they can go forward and produce what they're trying to do. Now comes the second part. If you, as a leader, understand what your case is, understand what the people need, and understand the culture that you need to create, now you have to be a real leader. And the leader needs to set strategic direction. So the first thing you need to do is establish what is the vision and then articulate, create and communicate the vision. It's a really important part because people can't all align around a specific mission. That means what they do every day to accomplish the vision unless they really understand what it's all about. The second part is to make sure you understand what the value is. The value has to be one which reinforces people's being creative and sharing and trying different things out. It is not about getting it right the first time. You saw that study from Accenture that showed that most of the people found they were not getting the support. The value should be one of saying whether you get it right or wrong is secondary to us. Our goal is that you're trying. And so it's okay to fail as long as you fail fast and can move on to the next idea. And that's why fail fast is such an important part of this characteristic right now. You want to give people some freedom to control their work and their ideas. So we're going to talk about the fact that some companies provide 15-20% of the time for employees to be able to work on these kinds of issues on their own and play with them and find out what they're trying to do. The third part is give them the resources they need, which is another reason very often for putting them in a different campus because you can provide some of those resources there. The fourth part is to provide air cover. So assuming they're working somewhere else or even within your establishment of what they're doing, understand they're bucking the system. So therefore you need to provide as a leader some kind of buffer to stop it or air cover against this resistance. And to underestimate the resistance is to really miss out on the opportunity to create the innovation. It's actually critical. And finally, when people do succeed, be very generous with your rewards and recognition and distribute them so that everybody feels they got something for it. So here's some examples of how companies have done this kind of thing. So Google is 20% based on 3M doing 15% before. Intuit also does 15 to 20%. There's a lot of companies that basically say, we're going to give you time to work on your own idea on company time, in addition, obviously, to your own company, so that you can produce what you're doing. Just as a great example of the impact you can have on this stuff, Google, Gmail, which is really making a lot of money in Gmail and AdSense, it's now a $10 billion product. The story about this is somebody was working on figuring out how to create AdSense and was working on it for almost 2 years. And finally, the boss turned to this person and said, listen, I think it's time to kind of give up. I mean, if at first you don't succeed, try again, but there's a point to give up. So I'm telling you, you got till the end of the week and let's just move on. With that, for whatever reason, time was right, came back the next day. She opens up her computer and she opens it and sees suddenly AdSense's first prototype on there. And he comes in and he says, yep, we figured out how to do it. And it's now a $10 billion annual product. Okay. So again, giving people time to work on it is important. This was a 2-year process. Sometimes we ask the question, who is most amenable to being able to use the different services that are available in terms of being creative? And the answer is it's anybody. Traditionally, we look at people who are really creative and they're a good spokesperson. They stand out and bring attention to it. So companies that don't have all those extroverts very often decide they need to change this game so they can get introverts to doing it. One such company is Right Solution. Right Solution is a software company. Software people in general are more likely to be introvert than extrovert. So it creates something called the stock market of ideas. When you come in, you get $10,000 worth of stock, which is basically a credit you can use to be able to create new ideas. People then list their ideas as they go through it on basically a stock market board, an exchange, and they look at it. If they like the idea, they can quote unquote buy shares into it. At the end of each quarter or half year, when they're doing the assessment, they're looking at which companies, which ideas are in this company are getting the most buy-in by people, and then what happens is they give those the priority in terms of getting additional resources to be able to produce it. What's real interesting is Right Solution produced many products that have produced real benefits for the company in many ways. But one of them that's really interesting was a product that developed for Hasbro. Okay, so it doesn't always have to be in the company. This was something that somebody came up with a game idea of using software on $1 billion product for them, and obviously they got their percentage by sharing it with it. If you're not going to create a full dedicated system, you can do it on a temporary basis. So what many companies do is they create what I call creativity and innovation circles, kind of like quality circles, which was developed in the 70s and the 80s. This is about being creative. So different members of different departments get together periodically to bring together an ideas that they have and try to stimulate creatively they do that to stimulate the ideas that could generate innovations. And that team can do it. And it's amazing that you get people all over, everything from a janitor to a CEO can contribute on it because they look at things differently and they know different perspectives. One great example is there was a problem with an air conditioning system in a company, and everyone was talking about different solutions, different pipes, and everything like that. And one of the people down there actually was in the maintenance department downstairs, and he said, "You know something? There's something down there that you all take a look at." And I forget exactly what it was, but there was actually something that needed repair. They repaired it. Didn't cost a whole lot of money. It solved the whole problem. Point was, again, they were creative about looking for an answer, but everyone thought the problem was something different. That's why different perspectives are so important. Today, if you're in the software world, you see this in the form of hackathons. Facebook, lots of companies are doing this. They bring people together a couple times a year for 1 or 2 days, and they just give them a chance to go play with what they're doing. So they're nurturing an unstructured, okay? Let people work on their own to develop what they want to do as they can do it. What happens is not just to limit it to the people inside your company. Increasingly, people are understanding that if you open the system to outsiders, you get even more great ideas of what you do. So, for example, the X Prize was created to help encourage people to figure out how we can get into space now that NASA can't be relied on, and NASA wanting private industry to do it. And so Peter Diamandis introduced this prize to encourage teams to compete. Some of you are familiar with the next Netflix prize. It put out an award for $1 million to be able to have people create an algorithm that improved the recommendation level of different movies that people might want to see by 10%. It's a great story about what happened. You had literally hundreds of teams trying to work on this thing over a period of time, not everybody getting anywhere. Toward the very end of the process, two teams decide to work together as opposed to against each other. And there are a couple of teams who did this, but one of them gets it in literally, I think, like minutes before the other one, just in time to win it, and beats them by literally 0.01% in terms of improving it by over 10%. And people do that. Allstate, for example, now here's a different kind of scenario. It's an insurance company. Ask the same question. How can we predict who's going to be more likely to produce accidents or not, and how can we therefore change our rates in insurance and be able to be smarter at it? They did the same thing. They offered a prize, and the net result is they had a number of people apply. And here's the interesting part about this stuff. Generally, the people who first apply for any of these prizes are industry officials. And after a couple of days and weeks, other people who have nothing to do with the industry come in and make their recommendations. And usually the results show that the second group is the one who actually produces much more of the impact. Allstate saved something like $20 million by the new algorithm that was recommended by the people they have. Threadless is a t-shirt company. It crowdsources its designs. Flugov is a crowdsourcing high-end shoe business. So in the Threadless case, people get a percentage of each shirt, and that's their reward for doing it. In the Flugov case, they get the shoe named after them. The last time I was reading about this, everyone had donated essentially one idea for a shoe, and then gotten one. One woman got two, and so it was interesting. Like, how does she name the second shoe? But the point is, again, people have ideas outside. They give the ideas, and they're rewarded for it. Pfizer, Procter and Gamble, a lot of these biotech consumer product companies are realizing they need greater R&D. They've been cutting back little by little by little all of their R&D departments because they can't afford them. And again, that inbredness is not producing great new ideas. So the net result of this is they've been going outside and basically offering partners from outside. They can come up with ideas and innovations that they would get a percentage, and they're doing it. And the final part is to start with your internal people and run workshops for creativity and innovation, which is one of the reasons we do this for people. Through our creativity, Let's Get Creative, and our innovations programs, and now our new EXO program, Exponential Organizations. So now you're at the stage where you've got people being creative. When you do that, you need to differentiate what's a dissenter versus an innovation, because this is very important. People who are complaining about what's there can generate innovation. A lot of times people view that as a dissenter and want to stifle them. You need to understand that the only way you're going to create innovation is by encouraging some dissent, because that's the way to do it. So it's not to suppress dissenters. What you really want to do is encourage it, but manage it in a process which challenges the status quo, offers new ideas, and forces people to change their assumptions. That's the way to work it. You then want to move to the next level of using team building to reinforce innovation. Because again, you want everyone who's part of the team to help out. That support is going to be critical. So you figure out what are the complex issues that are key and create consensus about it. You want to make sure that when you're managing it, this is your job as a leader, is to get rid of the tangential debates. Not everything needs to debate, it needs to be worried about. Focus on the biggest issues. You learn how to use meeting time really well. Always have agendas, always structure your time. I do a lot of work with my executives when I do executive coaching on time management. It's one of the critical parts here too. Make sure that everybody in the group feels opened, that they can come up with ideas, that everyone can participate and encourage it. I recently read about a company, a group that went after a contest. It's a global contest, and they actually won first prize. And the reason was, instead of bringing in software engineers, they brought in people with completely different backgrounds, including architects and engineers and designers. And they helped produce a slightly better product than everyone else, and they won first place. Again, quiet people may not speak up because they think, well, I don't have the software skills you have, but they have a perspective that can make a difference. And then focus on decision making. Make sure that people feel they can contribute at any time. As a leader, you need to constantly keep your attention on your job as that buffer. So you need to keep people focused on what they do inside and keep people from outside from interfering. So you don't want everybody knowing what you're doing. That's why skunk works are very often off campus and nobody knows what they're doing. You want to make sure that they really have not being interfered with. You want to make sure that people internally are working with good project management, so they're working forward. So when you do report, you have something to go for. You want to keep evaluations appropriate, not inappropriate from the internal point of view, which is different from the external point of view. You want to take pressure off the people because that's not necessarily going to help. And what you want to do is not focus on status quo. You want to focus on innovation, change. What you can actually do is embed innovation into a corporate value. So I work with something called ETW, Evaluate to Win. It used to be called Evaluate to Win, then Execute to Win. My version, if you want to look at it, is called EVAL, the number 2, WIN.com. But the essence of it is that it's a system that encourages people to focus on the strategy and culture that are going to produce positive consequences for the company and the individual, and you can incorporate in it innovation as being part of one of the goals that you want to see achieved. So, in sum, it's all up to you. If you really want creativity and innovation in your company, you need to take charge as a leader. You need to be a role model. You need to be a leader. You need to encourage people to take risks and support them when they do. You need to be able to buffer them from the forces within a company that are not there. When someone dissents, don't shut it down. Give them credit for being open, sharing new ideas of what they're doing and how they do it. You want to manage expectations, especially by those outside, because things take longer than you expect and need new help that you hadn't anticipated. And finally, when you've got that innovator, reward them and hold on to them. It's very often amazing to hear about how people leave giant companies that have been very creative, because once they've created it, people kind of just disregard them and they want to move on, and they don't feel that company is any more supportive, and therefore they leave leading companies to go to the next place. So hold on to your innovators. If you follow my advice, you will be a hero to your team, to your company, and obviously to yourself. And that, as you know, is what presentation excellence is all about, helping people become heroes to themselves and their companies and the communities they work with. And with that, I want to thank you for attending today's presentation. To learn more about the workshops we do, you can see them on Betterway Workshops and Webinars.com. You'll have a list of some of the workshops we have, as well as Commanding Strategies, which is our company that focuses on helping people adopt these techniques in their companies. Very often we have what we call strategic advances. We don't believe management should ever retreat, so we don't look at it that way. We look at it as strategic leadership advances, and they use these techniques as part of it to lay out what next year's program should look like and making sure they're going to be even more successful next year. We're a little over time right now, so I'm going to end at this moment. If you have a question, you can see my credentials over here, and you can follow through and attend